Okay, let's do Tanya for today, for Monday, 26th of Nisan, April 13th. So we're continuing today in Tanya in chapter 42. And just to remember what the flow was everybody has a spiritual spark of Moshe, of Moses inside of us, which translates as the das component of your soul. What's the das component? The ability to be conscious and internalize divinity, right? The fact that a created finite being, my new coin term is a tiny speck of consciousness, a tiny finite speck of consciousness, can be aware of an infinite consciousness of God is seemingly impossible, right? Can an ant appreciate your, your job? The way you write for the emails you type for your job, can an ant appreciate that? No. How much more so a tiny speck of consciousness cannot appreciate infinite God consciousness. And yet we can. How? A, because God makes it possible. And how does God make it possible? Through creating the, through the Torah. That's the bridge. And the Torah is the bridge into your das, into your antenna for this type of stuff. That's the Moshe. Moshe was the full embodiment of that. And you have a part of that. However, we said yesterday that don't think that this is a automatic, that you can automatically feel groovy. It takes a lot of work in two ways. One, it takes refining your body to not get in the way. If the body is coarse, materialistically inclined, you got to, in the quote, pound the body. Meaning, what does it mean? It doesn't mean beat yourself up. It means, beat the ego, as we said earlier, through thoughts of teshuvah, of realizing you're not so great in of yourself. And the second, so one thing is you have to pound your ego, you have to refine the body to not get in the way, which is a very interesting idea because there are many spiritual giants who are probably very egotistical, right? Because they're big minds, they're big philosophers. But that's not God. Big intellect doesn't equal you access God any more than, simple touch accesses God. We're talking about an awareness of something beyond intellect, and to live with that. That's a very, it's very delicate. So you have to become delicate. You have to tame your ego to be more delicate. And then you got the soul, which I'm trying to as the mind. I mean, we're talking about the soul as in not as in the soul, as in the spiritual, the metaphysical part of it, your mind. That you got to focus it on contemplating about God, as explained in, there's the Jewish sources talk about how to think about God. And we talked, Gary, chapter 41, Tanya, first 17 lines. That was the Rebbe's go-to for introductory, basic, repetitive meditation.
Right. You've said that a number of times.
I like to...
but I'm sure you can say it 100 times, and that's not too many.
Well, I think the point is I'm talking to myself, because all of us are highly materialistically inclined in today's day and age. just the mere, we see more advertisements in a week than they saw in a lifetime, 100 years ago. Or images of people, we probably see more than in a week than they saw in a year or a life. So we need to really simplify it so we can cut beneath all the noise. So the way I cut beneath the noise is that, the Rebbe said this, and I'm just, trying to make sense of it to myself. The first 17 lines of chapter 41 Tanya is that, it's the meditation for our small attention span generation. Very, very simple. If we have time, we'll talk about what that is. But the point is, you gotta hold a thought about God. You have to think about God and angles of the greatness of God.
So, Rabbi, you like movies, and there's a musical that goes way, way back called "Damn Yankees," where
I've heard of it. I don't know what it's about. Where
the Washington Senators, who were always in last place, managed to beat the Yankees and win the World Series. It's a famous musical, and so they sing about how you got to think about the game.
Okay.
So that's what you're saying. You got to think about the game. You got to think about God.
Yeah. You have to think about what this is all about. You can't just do it. You have to think about what all this is about. Which I think, in general, people don't like thinking. There's a bumper sticker, think, it's still legal. Anyways, so you got to think about Hashem till that lofty, invisible reality becomes more, more real, that you actually emotionally can operate on it. Very interesting. Okay, continuing today, Monday. That was all background. So you have the Moses, the Das antenna to appreciate God, but it takes effort and focus to have your antenna really appreciate God. And although God, has no bodily likeness, so how do we say, we quoted the Mishnah, reflect upon three things, you will not come to sin. Know what is above you, an eye that sees, an ear that hears. On the contrary, everything is revealed and known to him infinitely more than, for example, through the physical medium of sight and hearing. So it said in the Mishnah, to kind of paraphrase, Hashem is, all over, watching, real, very real, thinking what's in your heart, cheering you on, but knowing what's going on. And they said, the Mishnah said, remember, there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears. Okay? But some might say, wait a second. God doesn't have an eye and ear. So we're back to, I can't understand this. I don't see God. I'll go about my business. On the contrary, the fact that God doesn't have a limited eye and ear like we are limited with, God is the different level eye. It's not physical, but it's the source of eyeballs. It's the source of eardrums. So it's going to be much more powerful. By way of illustration, God's seeing and hearing is all pervasive. It's like a man who knows and feels within himself all that's happening to him being experienced by each of his 248 organs, such as cold and heat. It's not like you have to see outside. God is everything. So God just knows what's going on with him. So you can at least appreciate a little bit how Hashem knows what you're thinking and doing, because you're all within Hashem. Hashem is called Hamakom, the place, because the world is in the place of is God's before the world. So the world is within God's place. feeling even the heat. A person can feel the heat in his toenails, for example, when he's scorched by fire. So also their essence is substance, and all that is affected in or by them is known to the person sensed in his brain. In a similar manner of knowledge, by way of analogy, God knows all that befalls all created beings of both higher and lower world because they all receive their flow of life from him. As it is written, from you come all things. Ki mimcha hakol. And this is the meaning of what we say in the Musaf prayer of Rosh Hashanah, no creature is hidden from you, inasmuch as all created beings emanate from him. As Maimonides, speaking as a philosopher, has said, as the Kabbalists actually agree with this point, as is written by Rabbi Moshe Cordovero in the Paradis, that by knowing God, by knowing himself, as it were, he knows all created beings, whose source of existence is his true existence. Again, we are within God. God came first. So whatever's created is in time, spatial dimension is within God. And if it's within God, God merely has to know what's going on within himself, which is anything that's happening, and it's known. This analogy of soul and body, however, is only to calm the ear. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's a relatable analogy. It's to calm the ear. In truth, however, the analogy of soul and body bears no similarity at all to the analog of godliness and creation. Because why? He gives that caveat. You can't put God in absolute, human terms or anthropomorphic terms. Why? For the human soul, even the rational and the divine soul. Wow, cool. I actually know this. He mispe'elas mim'ori haguf etzarei. It's affected by the events which transpire within the body, and it's pain by reason of its because of its enclothement of its if it's being clothed within the vivifying soul, we call the animal soul, which in turn is clothed in the body itself. God, however, is not, heaven forbid, affected by the events of the world, and so by the reason he's saying this caveat is to put a big disclaimer. We're not saying that a person that anything in the created world changes God, because then when you make changes in God, you're taking away from monotheism. You're saying this is a before and after, right? If there's God let's say you throw a rock at heaven or you blaspheme, God forbid. What happens? And it hurts God in a real change way, right? The problem is, and there's a before and after. If there's a before and after, now you put duality into God. You split God. We're trying to say God is consistently one throughout. Nothing that happens in the world can change God. But by the soul does get affected by the changes of the body to some degree. There is pain. It's a different level of pain. It's not neurological pain, but there's a soul pain when something happens to the body or the body acts in a way that is painful to the soul. God, however, is not, heaven forfend, affected by the events of the world and its changes, nor by the world itself. None of them affect any change in him, God forbid. Nor in his absolute unity, just as he was one before he created world, so too he's one after the world. In order to help us understand this well with our intelligence, the scholars of truth, aka the Kabbalists, have already treated at length in their books an explanation we found there. He's not going to get into the details. Do we have the Steinsaltz volume 2? Did you use it the other day? Number 2. 2 stars. Thank you. However, thank you so much. However, all Jews. So, why is he telling us this? He's trying to give a general proof that it's basic Judaism 101, going back to the Mishnah, to contemplate about God. He showed in Halacha, in the beginning of Shulchan Aruch, it says a person should wake up and realize the King of Kings is over him, and then be spurred to action. He quotes a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Histaka b'shlosha dvarim ve'inat tabala de'avera. Gaze at three things, you won't come to sin. An ear that hears, an eye that sees, an ear that hears. And he explains it. That's the source of, this is one of the sources of, a person must contemplate about God. And he gives an example that obviously your contemplation is going to be limited. And you're going to use the tools you have to appreciate God while knowing God is even beyond that. But it doesn't take away. You have to use the tools you have. You can't say, I'm a finite speck of dust. What am I going to appreciate of an infinite God? You can't get away with that. Well, you're going to use your dust speck tools to go understand the infinite God? Yes, you have to use that. And of course, with the disclaimer that you're not limiting God to your dust speck tools of contemplation. However, another point is that maybe it would give you a problem well, how does that work? I'm trying to understand the words here. That if you're telling me you have this finite human mind that has limited and therefore imperfect and not fully correct awareness of God due to the lack of tools, then you basically say you go as far as you can. You say it's imperfect. It's pretty, I'm making God powerful, but it's like, to a point. It's in the car. And I said, no. So then what's the point? So you're doing the best you can do, but it's like not really true. So he says it's not a problem because you do the best you can do to appreciate God with limited tools. And the fact that God's beyond those tools, that caveat, which is very important, you have another mechanism for that. That's called your emunah. However, all Jews are believers, descendants of believers, without any speculation of mortal intellect whatsoever, and they declare you're the same before the world was created and so forth, as been explained above in chapter 20. That's how I understand the flow here of this is not yet a full meditation. This is just proving how contemplation of God is it's step one of everything. Even though your contemplation is always going to be imperfect, because you only know so much, and God's beyond whatever you know, that's okay. It's okay because you have emunah for the other part. I just want to see if I'm right on that. And another thing, the day before, another important line from the Talmud about this was, Yegaiti matzasi tamen. If someone says, I toiled, particularly in Torah or looking or finding God, and I succeeded, I found it. Yagaiti, I toiled, umatzati, I found it. I found the Torah knowledge or the God in the Torah knowledge. Tamen, you believe him. The Rebbe always point out that when you exert your mind, I toiled, to the best you can, which is, again, it's not infinite, right, but it's the best you can. What happens, Hashem rewards it with finding it. Finding is not just a reward. Finding is a windfall. You get more access than you even worked for. You get a windfall of knowledge or awareness, wisdom. And we said yesterday to search it for like a treasure. If you knew there's a treasure deep under your house, you just don't know exactly where, and you have to you're going to go take a loan out and buy digging tools and search and search and search. If you knew there was $1 billion in your yard, you would do whatever you have to do to get to that, even if it took years. Okay. I think that's enough to go for today's Tanya.